Hello, Prabin.
Hey,
Welcome to the early days of Micromobility podcast. I have to say, it's an honor to have you on. We've known each other for many years, worked together, different companies, and I definitely had to have you on this podcast if I wanted to tell the story of the early days of micromobility because a lot of people probably know in this industry there is no micromobility without the voice of Prabin, whether it's on LinkedIn, Twitter, at events. Prabin is always there, has an opinion, has experience in terms of operations, IoT, everything. So welcome to the podcast.
thank you.
And I want to tell the story of you, why you got into the industry, but then we will also discuss, of course, your impact to the industry.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. And congrats. And it's really good that you started something like this because I always say that we have to have more voice from across the globe, and from Europe we don't have a lot of voice. And I'm really glad that you started this podcast.
Yeah, exactly. And the idea is also to make our industry more accessible to the wider public, right? Because sometimes it's people don't really know what's going on and stuff. So it's really nice. And I am very happy with the guests that I was able to get. Very, very happy. You have great guests. So to kind of like kick off this episode, I want to know a little bit about your background because you have a very interesting background and degree. I want to know like the things that really shaped you and helped you become who you are and really drove you to this industry.
Cool. I'll try to keep it short. So I come from a very small town in India, south of India. Did my schooling there. And luckily, I was fortunate to have education in English. So that's how I could speak English. And the town where I come from, there's not a lot of access to external world. So the only way we could learn about things is books or magazines or talking to people, right? And when I was very young, I was super curious about different things. And that's when I jumped into coding. So I learned programming early on in a very small institute there. And started learning about electronics and many other things. So generally, I was curious about many things. And in doing so, I also bumped into astrophysics. So early on, I was like super interested in astrophysics. I was trying to learn more, build new theories then with whatever limited knowledge that I had. And when I had to decide on what I want to learn, pursue as my for university, I knew how to code, and electronics I thought it wasn't a big deal because everybody were doing electronics. Mechanical engineering wasn't so attractive either, and aerospace was something that was just coming up in India. Right, so there was a lot of research on the space side, but aeronautical engineering as such was just coming up, and there were very few graduating out of university, and I found that as a challenging topic to learn. Right, so the reason why I picked that is because it was completely alien to me. I mean, there was no other fancy story behind it.
That's very interesting because like it shows that you need a challenge. And that you are looking for challenges based on what you just explained.
Absolutely. So, I mean, for me, I think I love the process of learning new things. It doesn't mean that it'll stick in my brain for a very long time and I will remember everything. But life is just one shot, so you have to use all the opportunities to learn new things.
Exactly.
Right? So that's how I got into aerospace. And then after getting into aerospace, I was fortunate enough to have really good, colleagues there. Where I learned a bit more of coding, a bit more of electronics, a bit more about what you can achieve in life, right?
Yep.
And so that's my journey there. And when I was in my third year of my university, I got selected in a campus placement. So there's a companies coming to campus and picking,
they only pick the top tier students, right? I mean, you need to mention that as well.
kind of. So they picked four out of many. And that's how I got into the aerospace industry as such. So it was a startup based in Bangalore where they were working on different engineering problems linked to aerospace.
Okay.
And I worked in different fields like design of aircraft structures and analysis of aircraft structures. But then even there, I was not so much focused on the aerospace aspect of it, but then I was so fascinated about the entire concept of company building. So I was jumping into different things about recruitment or finance or business. So anywhere I could say I could get an opportunity, I was just jumping on. Right.
Okay.
And so I mean, the reason why I'm saying this is that I'm not a specialist. So I'm a generalist trying to learn different aspects of things.
But would you say that you try to specialize in a certain subject that you put your mind to and dig deeper? And because
so I mean, I think one of the foundations that I had is about how to learn. Right, so I think that's a very important skill set.
Exactly.
Right? Once you have the basics of different things, like for example physics, chemistry, and other things, right, or basics of engineering, basics of coding, you can build on top of that. Right. So at different phases of life, what happened is that maybe I would pick a certain topic. For example, many years ago, I started a company that was focusing on artists. Right. So then I started diving deeper into art and the field of general arts, right? And for example, at Kite, I wanted to build my own software. Right?
I remember you coded Kite.
Yeah.
I think it was like in 2 weeks or something.
Yeah.
I remember you told me, I was like, hey, I just coded Kite in 2 weeks. I was like, what?
So I mean, if I have to dive deeper and build something with a goal, I can build that. Purely, it's not that I'm like super good in coding and I could build that. I know how to do Google search and find the right resources and then start building.
Yeah.
Right? So I think the base of what I am today, it's based on the fact that I learned to learn new skills.
That's a nice way of putting it. So how did you ultimately end up in Belgium, and then end up in mobility? Did you first do like the corporate route, like most people, or
so? It was this aerospace company that I was part of, and then I moved on to another aerospace startup as well, based in Bangalore, where we grew the company from just 3 or 4 people to 30 when I exited.
Yep.
And so these two were startups, right? Startup scale-ups. And I also had this company called Rhapsody, which was into helping artists. So it was a startup as well. But I felt that what I lacked was probably a corporate exposure where you get exposed to processes and all that. And I joined a French engineering company. I worked in India for a couple of years for that engineering firm, and there was an opportunity to move to Europe. And I mean, I said yes. Did not know what the challenge was, but then I said yes, and came to Belgium, and was very challenging for me. But then I managed to survive within the corporate, trying to build new business models within the company, and that was my corporate stint. I still feel that I probably overstayed. I should have jumped into starting business much earlier, but then it also gave me sufficient time for me to think about what ventures that I want to create and also shape myself a little bit, in terms of learning how a company should be run.
Exactly. I think with my own personal experience, it was good for me to first work at Uber for a year, because you learn things like being structured, things that you, as a startup founder, first time startup founder, things that you might not know, and those are the mistakes that you can learn from the corporate.
Absolutely. I think startups are good, and you learn a specific skill set from startups, but then a corporate exposure gives you much more and much more meaning. Yeah, exactly. I mean, when you scale up the company, you have to get to a stage where you bring some structure and process in place, which if you have a corporate exposure where it's super process oriented, you could borrow a couple of things that could be useful when you scale up.
Exactly. So after the corporate experience, did you jump into mobility right away? Let's first say around what time was that? Because we need to put the timing, because I remember the early days were wild. I want to know.
Yeah. So 2014 was when I got into this corporate job. 2011. 2014 was when I came to Belgium. And 2018 was when I started my first company in Belgium. So it was a time when I decided that I want to work on 3 different ideas.
Okay.
And 3 were not related to mobility, but then it was in blockchain and different things, and started building prototypes around it.
Yeah.
So one was blockchain, one was in news curation.
You were already doing blockchain back then?
I was trying to. So there was
Okay.
what I thought was that I would focus on 3 ideas and probably one would materialize.
Yeah.
Right. So one was blockchain, and another one was in news curation. So I built a prototype for that as well. I call it as off the day. So it's like news of the day or a photo of the day and all that. So built a prototype around it. Had a team working on it as well. And then the third one was helping European companies outsource to different countries, right? And based on a bunch of cultural theories. So, there are some cultural metrics that you can use for you to have efficient global shoring, so to say, right? So these are 3 ideas that I worked on, and then I said I'll keep 6 months for it. And finally, Mayton materialized. Yeah. So Mayton was the first company that I launched in Europe. So when working on Mayton, that's how I met Stefan de Hoos,
exactly, yeah.
Who was my ex-colleague at the corporate job, and there was we were at an event, and he came with a fancy device, a mobility device, a 2-wheel device, and it said Freel. And I don't know if you remember, then it was just a sticker.
Black text on white.
Yeah. And it was just a sticker on a e-12 scooter, right? So I was so fascinated by the form factor, and this is the first time I'm seeing a e-scooter in flesh, right? And I asked him about it, and he let me try it, and then he put me in touch with you. And that's when I started, reading more about what these e-scooters are and, the entire market, right? This was in 2018, I believe. And within Mayton, in the due course of doing business, I met Cedric. So that's my co-founder. And he was working on a company called Click on Bike, which he founded a couple of years ago.
Yeah,
so they were into bike sharing, and they were at a juncture where they were trying to see what to do next, right? And that's when I met him, and then we sat together and built e-motionlabs. So e-motionlabs is a company that took inspiration from what we built at Click and Bike, which is like building bikes and all that, but then the electronics part of it, the IoT. And then we said, hey, within e-motionlabs, we could probably build this entire stack of electronics and the software stack around it. Not the fleet management system, but the device management system.
The communication modules then.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. Communication module and the software stack around communication modules.
Exactly.
Right? And that's how I got into mobility. So, it was e-motionlabs and also seeing Freel for the first time. That's how I jumped into mobility.
I remember, so when Stefan put us in contact, the first time we met, it was at a coast station.
Yeah.
And one thing that was very striking after we talked is that you asked me how many scooters I was going to launch in the near future. And I was thinking about a few hundreds. Yeah. And then you said, no, you need to have like a few thousands, and I was just starting out. I was like, oh, that's a few thousands,
Absolutely.
That's something that really was very interesting to
It was very interesting because, we know about Tier, Y, and Lime and all these guys, but then Freel was much earlier than many of these guys, right? In Brussels, when Freel launched, right, to corporates and all that, there was no tier, there was no dot, right?
Exactly.
And I strongly felt that maybe if you had a couple of thousand devices, put them in the streets, I think you would have this advantage of being much earlier to the market.
Yeah, if we had received good funding, everything was possible. Actually, last night I saw a picture from back in the days with Freel. It was a picture of 6 people looking at an e-2 on the ground.
Yeah, another picture.
Yeah, you saw it on Twitter, right? And I couldn't believe that back then I was actually, doing demos and having people look at an e-2 scooter like it's like a revolutionary thing. And that was like back in 2018, it's very, very cool to look back on those days.
And like I said, e-2 had the right form factor, even the weight. I think you guys did a good thing with the scooter selection, especially for
all the credits to Stefan, because Stefan, he did the research and
and it was also like new for everybody. We didn't have all these scooter craze then.
Right? It was exciting when you try the scooter, right? It was very, and it's a good quality. The e-2 was great quality back then. I don't know where they went now, but
it's a very good personal scooter.
It's one of the best. All right, so that's how you got into the micromobility industry, right?
That's how I got into micromobility, and like I said, one of the things about me is that if I get into a certain industry or a certain technology, I dive much deeper, right? And that's what I did with micromobility as well, right? And also, like, when you dive deeper, you learn more insights, and there's no point in you keeping those insights to yourself, right?
Yeah,
exactly. And the best thing that you can do is like share.
Exactly.
Right? And also at the start of all this micromobility ventures, I was nobody. I mean, nobody knew me, right?
But
nobody.
I mean, everybody was new, right?
Yeah,
like it was a great opportunity to really,
exactly.
have an impact. Yeah.
Exactly. And for you to succeed in any industry, you have to create a brand for yourself, right? And there's no better way to create a brand for yourself other than, sharing what you learn, right? And if you look at my Twitter feed or LinkedIn feed, it's all about my learnings,
yep.
right? I mean, what I learn, I just put it out, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
And whatever thought process that I have, I just put that out, right?
Yep.
So that many others can learn, right?
Yep.
And that's something that I also do when I meet people as well. It's not that I hold back what I know. Even if you meet me for an hour, I'll give you so much insights that I learned that it's much better to share
exactly
without any expectations than
there is no point in holding the knowledge for yourself, because, like you said, the true value is in learning and learning and learning, right?
Absolutely.
So
absolutely.
You need to share the knowledge, and you just need to continue learning.
Exactly. And when you have a certain thesis or thought about something, when you share, people actually debate about it. They actually
and it can improve, right?
Exactly.
Like, yeah.
Exactly. So if you think about my thought process, say 2-3 years ago about micromobility and how it is right now, I don't think it would have matured without me sharing things out in Twitter, LinkedIn, or talking to people.
Yeah, I remember you were one of the first, or one of the early people who was consistently putting reports online, talking about the app data. I remember you were one of the early people, like, sharing the app data, discussing the app data, the usage.
Yeah.
I mean, and you were doing it for free.
Yeah, and it was my monthly kind of learning experience. So what I used to do is, like, at the end of every month, I think I used to block like 2 days or something to read through every comment that users put on these apps, right? Both on Apple and
I remember
and Google. Yeah. So I wrote a script to scrape all this data, and then I used to read each and every one and then classify it. It was basically a learning experience for me, right? And so when you know what users want, then you can also build better products, right? Yep. And then I thought, okay, fine, I'm learning more, so why not just put that out, right? So, and I'm pretty sure it did help a bunch of people to shape up, their services.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what I was going to say, because people listened to you because you would say, okay, most accidents were because of this or that, and people saw it and then improved it. Otherwise, if nobody speaks about it,
absolutely,
they might not not do anything about it, right? So
yeah, and it's an advice to anybody starting companies: go to app stores, read those reviews. It's a treasure trove.
Because, right? I mean, those are the reviews that matter, right? Yeah. Those are your users, exactly. You're paying users, so
yeah. I mean, positive feedback is good, but then what I also concentrate there is, like, all the negative feedback that people give. Not to dwell in negativity, but then you can learn a lot and improve more, right?
Well, yeah, you usually improve faster through negative comments, because you can improve what was negative, right?
But positive feedback is an affirmation, but the negative feedback is an opportunity for you to improve, right? So
I would not want to be in a place where I only have positive feedback, because that means that I'm probably not improving or innovating enough.
Absolutely.
Then the end is usually near.
yeah. So yeah, I mean, those reports helped me learn as well, and then helped a lot of other people as well, and also created kind of a conversation with a lot of people, right? And which was healthy and good.
Yeah, exactly. And what is very important for this industry is the collaborations between different companies, hardware, software, and I know you put me in contact with a lot of people in the early days, and you were really someone who could easily connect with an IoT provider, a software provider, or a hardware provider. And how come you were able to easily connect with, different types of business or industries?
Personally speaking, the way I work is that I connect dots. I'm very good in connecting dots, right? So if I talk to somebody and if I had a conversation with somebody else that was interesting, and if I feel that there could be synergies connecting these two people, I always do, right? I mean, I know that there are some people they charge a fee for connecting people, but then for me it's like if I find it interesting, I always connect people, right? Yeah. So that's one thing. And then if it's in specifically about how from IoT perspective we could connect to people, I think the industry was so early on that everybody was seeking out to everybody else.
Exactly,
right?
Yeah.
Like for example, scooter providers were seeking out to IoT and software providers, right? And operators were seeking out for every other services that were available, right? So I think it was pretty easy for us to connect within each other, because the seeking was mutual.
Yeah, and indeed, like you say, like the need was there, right?
Yeah.
Like if you want to provide like a sharing business,
yeah,
you need an IoT.
Absolutely.
You need hardware. You need software. So
yeah.
you need to work together in any ways, right?
Yeah.
So around 2018, so when we all started, that's when the scooters were coming from America, I guess, to Europe, and it was crazy. It was really like, I don't think I have ever seen anything like this before, the way it grew, the amount of money that went in. I mean, how did you look at it at those early days? Like,
I like when human beings experiment on new things, right? And it could end up in a failure, but then in many cases, these tiny experiments is what pushed humanity forward, right?
Yeah,
so
exactly.
I was excited that Brussels was flooded with scooters, right? On one hand,
yeah,
right?
Yeah.
I mean, of course, there was like a lot of mess and all the stuff. That's secondary. But then I was excited that there's a new way of moving around, which is like fun and exciting. That's just flooding.
Yeah.
Right.
Actually, when I look back, I think a lot of companies started out in Brussels or using Brussels as a test. I remember Thiers. Dot.
There was Voy at that time. There was
exactly.
The company from Daimler collaboration.
Hive.
Hive was here. There was also a local player from Brussels. So everybody came to Brussels. I think it is also because Brussels is a bit of a easy city to approach, right? The city officials are probably a bit flexible. But then on the other hand, if you really want to take a bunch of cities and see which cities to go to, Brussels has, I think, about 2 million population overall. Berlin has 3.5 million. And if you look at the density, it's a bit higher than many other cities. Right?
Exactly.
And then if you also add in a factor of GDP per capita, Brussels is one of the highest. Right, so if you do this math, if you take a list of all the cities and do a math, Brussels will definitely be on the top. Right, with London and Paris and Berlin, right? So I feel that maybe math led all these scooters to us as well, but
but still, most of them left Brussels after a while.
Yeah.
But now they are coming back. I think.
True.
All right, so let's get back to the to the early days. Let's keep it chronological. So I would like to know how you were able to build e-motionlab, because it ended up playing a big part in the industry in terms of the IoT. So you started in 2018 when you met Cedric. And I know, I think Cedric, his company was doing bike share. I think it was more like tourism-based bike share. So they also had to do like a switch into IoT, because it's a different field. I mean, it's a different game, I would say, right? So
true. Yeah. So Cedric's company, it was called Click and Bike, and what they were doing was building custom e-bikes specifically for tourism, right? And this was, I think, around 2015-16. So they were one of the earliest ones to build e-bikes on their own, right? With very, very small capital. Yep. I don't think they raised crazy amounts of money.
Was it shared, or was it like renting, or like did they had any technology in it?
Yeah. So the challenge then was that connecting these bikes to the cloud. Otherwise, you cannot put it for rental for tourism, right? So then they had a big tablet, like an iPad, which was attached to the handlebar.
Yeah, I remember. Yeah, I remember. Yeah.
Yeah, and the idea was that if you go to a touristic place, you rent one of these bikes from the hotel, right? And say for example, if you go to Paris or something, you rent it from the hotel, and then say that, hey, I want to take a 10-kilometer bike ride. So the system would automatically suggest a route taking you to important locations across the city.
Okay.
Right. And the tablet also helped connect the bike to the cloud.
So how was the bike connected to the tablet then? So the bike was connected to the IoT directly?
Oh no, so the tablet had the IoT, and the bike was connected to the IoT. So it was kind of like an external IoT, but then connected to the subsystems of the bike.
Oh wow!
Right. So for example, you can lock the bike, unlock the bike, read all the vitals and everything. Right. This was early days, right? So that's why you had this large tablet.
Yeah.
But then it was impressive that they built the bike, the tablet, IoT, and everything with very less capital, right?
Oh, yeah.
But then the market is also challenging, right? And these are expensive. Unless you have crazy scale, it doesn't make much sense, right?
Yep.
So they were at a point to where they were deciding whether to continue the sharing business. Or to pivot to something else, right? That's when I came in, and then we decided that it's best to focus on the tech that we learned from it, because IoT was very new, right?
Exactly.
Very few were connecting e-bikes to the cloud.
Exactly.
And we had the technology for that, right? So we said, okay, fine, let's take that and focus purely on that, because there were very few companies doing that in a right way, right? Yep. And initially, our competency was in e-bikes, right? But then the e-scooter craze came in, so we jumped on that as well, and we had we didn't have success like Commodule. Commodule was on a completely different scale, but then we did have a tiny contribution there, right? Yeah. But the challenge there was that if you look at Segway and Okai, right, they were coming up with new models very in a very short period of time.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
But then for you to iterate on an IoT, it takes a couple of months as well, right? And on top of that, Segway and Okai, they did a pretty decent job in having their own IoT, and specifically Okai, with the integrated IoT, it made much more sense for players to just use that.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right. And from our point of view, it did not make much sense to focus on scooters a lot. But then we started focusing on e-bike companies like Fuel and a couple of all these big brands who would say, hey, I mean, in 2 years we want to bring this bike to the market, and then work with them to put IoT on their e-bikes. So that's what we focused on, right? And that's how we came to Bond. So Bond was a very big e-bike player. Right, so they had their own speed e-bikes, and they were moving away from Stromers to their custom e-bike, right? So and we had a commercial collaboration with them, and then which eventually led to very interesting conversations between both companies, because they were raising funds as well.
Yeah, exactly.
And we were raising funds as well,
yep.
Right? And it makes much more sense to vertically integrate in micromobility.
Exactly,
right?
Yeah.
And so we had the IoT tech and software, because I also built the Kite platform, which is a fleet management system, apps and everything. So it all made sense to bring these two companies together and go fundraising together, yep. Right? And that's how the acquisition happened in 2020.
Yeah, exactly. It was a match made in heaven, because if they wanted to make their own custom e-bike, they needed to make the IoT as well, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, the IoT business, it's very difficult to start from zero if you don't have the experience. So it makes more sense to partner with e-motionlabs.
Absolutely.
Who already has the experience and know-how.
Yeah, and it made sense that for them it is like the IoT part, software, everything is taken care of, and like I was saying about vertical integration in micromobility, what's super important is vertically integrating all core value blocks, which are super important for you to deliver a seamless service, mm-hmm. right? and it made sense to bring these two companies together.
Yeah, and would you say like there's a huge difference between scooters and e-bikes when it comes to the IoT and the communication model? Like, can you? I mean, I guess you cannot use the same type of IoT for a scooter and a bike.
We were in fact using the same IoT for scooters and e-bikes. I mean, if you look at it from the data that you draw and the operational logic, it's kind of similar, right? So basically you can use the same hardware, but then the firmware that runs on it might be different, right? Because bikes have a different protocol, and scooters, based on the brands, they have different protocols as well, right? So you can still use the same hardware.
Okay. Yeah. Because I would think that, because electric bikes, they have a lot of like wires and stuff, and it's difficult. I guess it's more difficult to like control an electric bike than it is to control like a electric scooter. But
no, I think e-bikes are much more mature. That you can draw much more information than e-scooters, right?
Oh, okay.
So for e-scooters, if you look at Okai and Segway, they have a certain set of protocols, and they would limit what data that you see or control, right? Or what subsystems that you control, right?
Yeah.
But for e-bikes, it's not like that. I mean, I think it's a bit more mature. That you have motor controller, you have battery management systems, which are much more mature, where you have much more control, right? So I mean, from a hardware perspective, just to conclude that hardware perspective might not have a lot of differences. The only thing is that for e-bikes, if in case you want to have a concealed module, so for example, you want to have it inside a frame or something, right? Then you might have to make some form factor adjustments. Right.
Okay.
Same goes for scooters as well, but that's the only difference. But from a firmware perspective, you can have a bunch of blocks which are like common, like call it as device OS, but then you just build few blocks on top of that.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So there are a lot of commonalities between these two.
Yeah, I mean, before like going on over to the next topic, what I really want to know is how you and Cedric were able to start e-motionlabs so fast. And then like move over to, partner with Bond in a short period of time, because obviously you have the software when it comes to the communication modules, but you also have like the physical things, right? I guess you need to make models, you need to like iterate. And over what time were you able to build the company and then sell it, I guess?
Yeah, I think everything came together somewhere in December 2018. That's when we did the rebranding and a small bridge financing as well.
Yeah.
And we kind of kick-started from there.
Okay.
Right? So we started reorganizing the company, making the company very lean. And I think within a couple of months we had our first prototype to build on. And then we moved from we were in a very small town called Husselt, not even Hasselt, right? So and we moved from there to Koda campus, which is like a much better campus. We started attracting really good talent. We built out the engineering team as well, much more stronger, and that's how we started. So from the pivot, so which was in 2018 till sale, it was roughly about 1.5 years.
Wow, that's really that's quite impressive, because I would think it would take half a year to actually build a company, not sell the company.
But then the thing in micromobility is that things move really fast, right? And Cedric and I, we had a very good understanding, and we had a good match. That 2018 we had this company, and then 2019 we co-founded Kite as well. Right? The software stack.
Yeah, exactly. Well, things move fast, but you need to move fast if you want to.
Absolutely.
If you want to survive in this industry, you need to pivot and move fast. Every 2-3 months, you need to improve your operations and everything, right?
Absolutely. Same goes for hardware and everything that you do.
Yeah, everything. Software, hardware, operations. You have a lot of knowledge when it comes to the operations. I want to discuss the operations of scooters, because at the beginning it was a mess. In terms of the charging, scooters laying all over. How did you? What was your opinion when you saw it, and how did you think about the evolution of the industry in terms of the operation?
I'm not an expert, but I mean, like, I'm not an expert like others that you would eventually have in the podcast. But you know, it's all an experimentation, right? Initially, if you look at Bird and Lime and all that, they had this gig worker model where you just put the scooters outside, and then maybe these people would take them home and charge and all this stuff, right? That's where we started, right? And then there was a lot of controversy around it, and all the money spent because every charging intervention. I think Bird and Lime, they were paying like $5 to $10 or whatever, right? And there was also a flexible one, right, where these swappers or chargers, they started spooking the system.
Exactly. I still remember.
Yeah. So we went from there and all the conversation around gig economy to a model where companies said, hey, you know what, we're going to have our own people and we're going to charge stuff on our own, right? And then it moved to a model where why picking all the scooters to a warehouse, then rather you could have swappable batteries, right? So I think we've had a crazy transformation in the last years, right, to a point where I think if you look at companies like Dot and Voy and Tier and all this stuff, I think they have very solid operating procedures, which I think are showing results, right?
And I think we need to mention that all these improvements happened in 2 years or even less.
Much less. Yeah.
So that shows how how the industry learns fast, and I cannot wait to see how it's going to be in 5 years, because if you look at the past 2 years, even with the corona, a lot of things improved for the better.
Absolutely. See, I mean, and also if you look at the initial days, it was I don't know if you still remember, I still have a bunch of these scooters. It's called the ES2s and
ES3,
so
ES4.
ES2 was the foldable ones, and then you had ES4s, right? And we went from that, which were like consumer grade scooters, right, and not supposed to be put out for renting.
Exactly.
Right? We went from there quickly to Model Max and all the Okai scooters. So the transformation was like pretty fast, right? And it's super impressive. I don't think I've seen such crazy fast transformation in any other industry.
Yeah, exactly. So what I also of course want to discuss besides the industry is what drives you to, because you are very passionate.
Yeah.
I mean, everybody in mobility is passionate, of course, because you kind of like become passionate even if you're not, because it's crazy. What drives you and what makes you really want to do what you do?
It goes back to a bit to my childhood. So when I was small and looking at astrophysics and all that stuff, a big life lesson that I learned is that life is just one shot, right?
Exactly.
And there's actually no purpose, meaning, and all this stuff unless you dive into spirituality or religion, right? But actually, in its raw form, there's no purpose or meaning, right?
Yep.
But then this purpose and meaning is something that you define, right? And when you think deeper, for the time that you spend on Earth, one, you have to be good to others and not create a ruckus. But then another thing that you can also do is try to make a mark, right? Or help humanity move forward a little, right?
Yeah.
I'm a very small fish, but then when I think of what I really want to do in life, it's about improving quality of life for human beings, right? And one of the things early on that I thought was that if you create jobs, right, that would actually pull up many families up, right?
Yep.
Pull many families up, right? So my initial focus was on creating jobs across the globe, right?
Okay.
But right now, my focus is on improving life expectancy for human beings, right? So basically, just to come to the point, it's about pushing humanity forward some way or the other, right? And then that's what drives me. And the last 3 years there was no break, and I love this whole thing of building companies and adding a tiny drop to this mighty ocean in a positive way.
Yeah, and I mean, and mobility, you do actually improve people's lives, because you provide them a way to move around, and that really has an impact on people's lives, right? It's the mobility.
See, I mean, something that we underappreciate is that bicycles, like a couple of 100 years ago, that bicycles were invented, that actually created so much freedom for people, right?
Yeah.
And played a big role in women's, movement and all this stuff, right? And if you go just 100 years ago, right, for probably like thousands of years, we had animal cruelty involved in our mobility, right?
Yeah.
If you think of it, I mean, we had horses and different animals that was transporting us, right?
Correct.
And just for the last 100 years, we kind of moved away from that,
Yeah.
right? And that's when, when I hear that, cars are bad and all this stuff. Yeah, but, if you look at the 200,000 years history, we are just 100 years into an iteration where machines are moving us. Yeah, I mean, it has a lot of bad effects, but then, we could improve on.
Exactly.
Right. So, yeah, forgot your question.
No, but you have a point, right? Like we discussed even before the podcast, there's always a balance, right?
Yeah.
If you want to create like a real impact, you need to balance things out, right? Yeah. I remember we discussed about that you cannot ban all the cars,
absolutely,
right?
Absolutely.
So maybe we can
So yeah. I mean, now I got back your question. So the interest in mobility is that as you create multiple mobility modes, right? So one of the reasons why I was excited for e-scooters is that it is actually a less polluting mobility vehicle, right? And it's a new way to move around.
And it gives access to mobility to maybe a certain demographic that usually might be less accessible to mobility, right? So
yeah, exactly. I mean, maybe not the shared ones, but at least owned mobility.
Owned ones, yeah.
I think it will end up becoming much more cheaper than even public transport, right? So, when you create multiple modes of transport, you have a variety of things that you can choose from. Right?
Yep.
It's not that you have to take cars all the time, but now you have bikes that you take, or now you have scooters that you can take, right? So I think that is super exciting, so that you make intelligent decision on what mode you want to choose, right?
Exactly.
If you look at a couple of 100 years ago, probably the only way you could move was torturing an animal, right?
Yeah.
Now you have multiple other ways.
Now we have all these different choices, but I think it's necessary to have these choices because then the people can choose based on their needs, right?
Absolutely.
And I think if we really want to have a long-term durable solution, we need to change behavior, right?
Absolutely, 100.
Habits and behavior.
Yeah, I wrote a blog post a couple of months ago, I believe, focusing on behavior change, right? One thing that is exciting about all these different modes of mobility is that, one, it gives choices, right?
Yeah.
But then it also pushes you to change your behavior, right? Just an example, which I keep bringing up many times, is that we are all excited about, looking at Amsterdam and, generally the Dutch, about how the bicycle culture is really good there. People use bicycles, right? And we try to mimic that, having infrastructure, buying more bikes, right? But then that's not what we have to learn from the Dutch, right? If you look at the number of cars per 1,000 people or 100,000 people, Netherlands has one of the highest numbers within Europe.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
But what is interesting about them is that they have cars, they have bicycles, but then they know when to use those cars, they know when to use those bicycles. Right, so it's probably they are much better than making those choices. Right?
Yeah.
So what we have to learn from them is not just buying bicycles and storing it in our house, which we don't use, but then learn how to make these choices. Right. So the one of the examples that I bring up, which is easy to understand, is that most of us, we undergo a physical fitness transformation journey, right?
Correct.
So at least me, I mean, when I was in Bangalore, I was serving on KFC and McD and Domino's every day, right?
And if you're an entrepreneur, I mean...
yeah, I mean, you don't know what to eat. You just consume whatever it is, right? But then at one point you say, hey, I mean, maybe what I'm doing is wrong, right? And then you try to learn about macronutrients and calories and all this stuff. And then you bring some order in your life, right?
Correct.
You change your behavior,
correct,
right? And then you in turn change your own life, right?
Correct.
And for me, what I feel is that most of us have to go through this behavior change in mobility as well.
Yeah.
right? Based on CO2 emissions or whatever, right?
Correct.
And if you read the blog post, it says that you have to set a target, CO2 emission target for yourself for a month.
Yep.
And choose options based on that, right?
Yep.
So for example, if you're using cars more, then you have to relook at every trip. Do you really want that car trip, or can you take public transit, right? And you keep diving down, right?
Yeah.
One of the things that I put out recently is that if you can walk, don't scoot. If you can scoot, don't drive, right? So
it makes sense.
Yeah, that's behavior change for everybody, and I really hope that all these companies that are pushing out different narratives, I really hope that they latch onto this and push behavior change so that users, they don't just go from walking to scooting, but then go from driving to scooting. Right?
Yeah, exactly. But that's the thing. I feel like these mobility companies, they should try to understand the people first, because now they provide a solution, just like that. Mm-hmm. And they try to learn from the solution that they provided. But I think it would be beneficial for everybody if you would first try to understand the need of the people. Yeah. Do they really need scooters there, or can they use like bikes or whatever? And I think that is something that still needs to improve.
I think it's about nudging users to move from cars to scooters. That's something that companies can do, right? Yeah. But then generally speaking, scooters, if you look at data across the globe, it actually replaced walking than...
Exactly. I when I saw the data, I think you posted it on Twitter or someone else, I was like, okay, maybe we are not going the right way, because that's not what...
No, I mean, see, it is also perspectives. I mean, for me, I don't look at e-scooters as planet saviors. I look at them as another new way of moving. It's a fun way of moving around, right? And it doesn't emit like crazy amounts like whatever other modes of mobility that we have, right? Yep. And I look at it that way, right? And it's okay that it is replacing walking. I mean, if you go to Brussels and look at people using scooters, right? I call scooters as calorie conserving machines, because if you look at people who are using, they are healthy people, right? And they are conserving calories that normally they have to spend walking for 2 kilometers or 1 kilometer, right? Yeah. So conserve that. But then, in the evening, if you see, they go back into the gym, and then run on a treadmill for, I don't know, 30 minutes, right? So, I mean, I think it's all in the perspectives. I don't think they are climate or planet saviors. They're just another fun way of moving around, and that's how we have to look at it. I mean, people normally, when I write things on Twitter, they think that I hate scooters. I love them. It's just a perspective. It's
because you're so passionate about it that you really care and have an opinion about that. All right, so I think you briefly discussed the narrative of different companies. Mm-hmm. Can you go into that aspect a little bit? I would love to understand your opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to name companies, but then I think within mobility, micromobility specifically, there are two section of companies. One, they push the narrative that they are planet saviors, right? Because scooters replacing cars and car trips, probably it would save a lot of CO2 emissions. Mm-hmm. But then there's like enough studies proving that most of the trips that are replaced are walking, public transit, and very little cars, right? So, if you do a net CO2 emission calculation, right? I mean, you can do it on your own, but at the end of the day, you will come to a conclusion that the net emissions are higher, right? If for listeners, if they are interested, one of the interesting studies which nobody talks about is a study done by a scientist. I think she's an academician. Called Andu Bortoli. I can probably send you a link and you can put it in the show notes. Right? And she made an analysis on Paris and a couple of other cities, and it actually establishes that the net CO2 emission is higher.
Oh wow!
Right, but that's the fact. But then you can say that, hey, I mean, we don't care about the trips that are migrated from walking and public transit, and I'm going to focus just on cars because everybody loves to hate cars, right? So
especially nowadays, it's all
I mean, because it's a narrative that will stick. I mean, if I say that, hey, I mean, I'm going to hate cars, I'm going to erase cars from streets, that's a narrative that people want to listen, right? So there's a bunch of companies doing that, and other companies, they are focusing on the fact that they are putting out a new way of moving around. I mean, it can be e-bikes, free-floating e-bikes, free-floating scooters, right?
Yep.
They're focusing on the fact that they're giving an alternate mobility solution. It is like, probably less polluting than cars, but then it's purely about giving people another option to move from A to B,
yep.
right? And I respect them a lot, right? So these are two companies, and I think they have their own way of working and thinking.
Exactly. And I think there are like two strategies, right? There is a specific company that is focusing locally in terms of operations, in terms of how they work. So their strategy is locally. But then if you are in many markets, the local strategy actually becomes, has a bigger impact overall, right?
Absolutely.
And then you have the other companies who, have a lot of funding, of course, and they just focus on the whole, like everything, all the countries, and they see it as one. But because mobility has to do with like culture and the local, the local culture and stuff, I think if you really want to have an impact, you need to go about it in a locally way, I believe.
Yeah, I mean, I think every city is different. Every culture is different, right? And everything needs a local focus. I mean, of course, I mean, if you're operating in different cities, there are synergies. For example, if you have a centralized engineering team, right? There are many things that where you can have some advantage. But then when you go to a city, I think you need a local approach.
Yeah, right? Exactly. And because
I think I keep saying this as well. It's micromobility is a B2G. Business to government, right? And every city is different. Every rules are different, right? So it needs localization.
Exactly. And when we look at the markets, obviously it grew very fast. One thing I also want to discuss is the funding. The funding doesn't stop. I kind of like want to have your opinion on this because it seems like there is no end to the funding. They keep putting money into our industry, and what is quite interesting is most operators have the same hardware. They use the same hardware. The software is very similar. I mean, scan the QR code to start. The pricing is also quite similar. But they have a lot of, funding. They are big companies. So where do you see this going? Where do you see the market going? Because at some points, they will need to create customer loyalty, or because for a customer, it doesn't really matter that much which brand they use, because it's all the same at this point, I think.
Yeah, see, I think we are super early with micromobility. Right, and we haven't reached a maturity level yet, right? And second point is that I know that how do you differentiate between each other was a question always. I still remember I think it was in the micromobility conference in Berlin where there was a question passed on to everybody, every operator, and they're like, "Oh, we are orange, we are yellow, we are green," right? But you don't necessarily have to differentiate, right? So when the market is really big. Just to give you an example, when you go to a train station, right, and you want to pick a bottle of water, right? There's a bunch of water bottles, and then you just pick whatever.
Exactly, it doesn't matter,
right? Yeah, I mean, probably you might look for the one that is your favorite, which you commonly use for whatever reason, though they all taste the same. Right?
Water is water, right?
Yeah, but then at the end of the day, you just pick a bottle of water, right?
Correct.
And if you look at the water bottle business, there's so many brands out there. Purely because the demand is so high and it can accommodate multiple players, right? So same thing for micromobility as well. I mean, I think the demand is so high that if you take a city, it can accommodate a couple of players, right? So you don't necessarily have to differentiate. That doesn't mean that you have to rest easy, right? But there are operators in Brussels where I use. I would walk a couple of 100 meters to take that particular scooter than others because I have some connection to that brand, right?
Okay.
And it stems from a couple of things. One is their belief system, their values, right? Second is the quality of service.
Okay.
Right. Normally, I mean, like probably I'm like, a bit more observing than other users where I time the
I know.
yeah, opening the phone to unlock.
Yes.
I normally time it on my watch and see how much time it takes. And there are some companies who are actually focusing on that and improving.
Oh, wow.
Right. And normally the service is like seamless, and I keep using them. Right.
Okay.
So there are ways to bring customer loyalty as well. But then at the end of the day, the fact is that the market is huge and it can take multiple players.
Exactly. And I asked that question because, when we had a lot of big players, a lot of companies, mass startups started to pop up.
Yeah.
But somehow they were not able to deliver what they promised. How come? Because for the end user, I think it might be easier if they have one app that they can use for all these different players, right?
Yeah, I mean, mass is a completely
because they promised at the beginning it was going to be a big thing, but
true. See, I mean, mass is a completely different subject which might need much more deep diving into. General thing is that I think it was David Zipper who beautifully wrote that mass hasn't found a business model that works. Which is true, right?
That is correct.
And on the other hand, one of the reasons I wouldn't use a mass app but use native apps from Dot or Voi or all the stuff is because if you just take Dot app, right, that you have in Brussels, they kept on improving and iterating on that over 2 years, right? And the ease of use is like so good, right? Why would I leave that and open a mass app which is not so good? I mean, I cannot name. I forced myself to use a bunch of mass apps, right? But I've always gone back to native apps of different companies, or if I want to find routing, Google Maps.
Yeah, Google Maps is really good at integrating,
exactly.
Especially the last few months.
So this is one side from a user perspective, the experience of using something, because I think I was mentioning it before our podcast that users of Micromobility are premium users,
correct,
right? And they demand premium service as well, right? And I'm so and users are so comfortable using those apps natively than using mass apps, right? And I was saying that, I forced myself to use mass apps, but then I went back, right? So this is from a user perspective. From operator perspective, the thing is, I don't think any operator could say that, hey, I mean, I integrated myself into this mass app and I'm like, blown away by the demand. At least I haven't heard it. We've had integrations as well, and it did not blow our, numbers.
But how come? Because that's it would create a convenience for the end user, you would think, but somehow it's not able to, or it was not able to deliver.
Yeah, I mean, see, specifically for e-scooters, it works more by visual than apps, right?
Yep.
So what happens is that, especially in cities, people just go to a place, look around. Oh, I see a Lime scooter. I'm just going to take that, right? It's very rare that they open the app and say, okay, fine, where is a scooter? I'm going to walk half a kilometer to that scooter.
That takes away the whole convenience.
Yeah, exactly. And max probably they might walk, say, 50 meters, 100 meters. But generally, it works by the fact that they are at a place, right? And they look around. Oh wow, there's Tier or Voi or Dot, right?
Yep.
I mean, and then they make their choice based on that,
okay.
Right? So this discovery part that mass offers doesn't make much sense.
Yeah.
Right. And also, like, I mean, generally mass apps, when you open it, it's all fully cluttered and
the user experience and
design, user experience is really
it's
bad.
It's not good yet, but I'm sure they will.
They can improve user experience, but then like what David Zipper says, they haven't figured out a business model that works. So yeah, because I mean, see, if you're going through mass, right? So the operating companies have to make money, and the mass companies has to make a tiny portion of that.
And the credit cards take the fee as well, which is pretty high. So.
Yeah, exactly. So at the end of the day, mass companies make very, very tiny, and it doesn't make sense.
Yeah. Now, yeah, it doesn't
No.
really make
From
make
a
that
bit-
much sense actually now that we talk about it.
Yeah, from a business perspective, it doesn't make sense, and that's why they are like trying to figure out new things about mobility budget and that and this. But we'll see where it goes.
All right. Okay, so let's have a discussion regarding the amazing scooter companies that we have. I think Thiers now is valued at 2 billion, which is quite impressive in such a short period of time.
Yep.
Dot and Voy, they're also doing amazing things. But these are the three biggest companies, and they all are a bit different, the way they go about things, the way they strategize things. For example, when we look at Thiers, they obviously they are working on their own charging hub, which I believe if they can work it out, it might be not revolutionary, but it will definitely help the industry forward because it will reduce a pain in operations. How do you look at these type of things? The way they differentiate themselves and their strategy, for example, when you look at Thiers with the charging hubs.
Yeah. I'm glad that companies are experimenting, right? And it's interesting that it is interesting that companies are experimenting, but I might have different views on what they do, right? I mean, Thiers has done an amazing job overall, right?
Yeah.
But the charging network, I have my doubts. I mean, I really hope that they succeed in what they do. But my problem with the charging stations is that users of e-scooters are premium users.
Exactly.
Right. And if you've used e-scooters, it normally costs like 2-3 euros per ride, right? Or if you're buying a pass, then it's like $40-50 on top of the bus pass that you have.
Yep,
right?
correct.
So for you to afford that, you have to have a certain salary. I mean, if you take Brussels, an average salary person cannot use e-scooters on a daily basis. Right?
Yeah.
It doesn't make sense.
No.
Right? So if you're okay spending 3 euros or something, would you say, hey, I mean, I want to swap a battery and save €1? I don't think so. Right?
No, it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, so that's one, and second is like it's still to see how these coffee shops and business establishments react to having charging stations within their premises, given that it's a dangerous good, right?
Yep.
And also I don't know how much revenue that brings, right? So somebody who really swaps to save €1, would they really go and buy something? I don't know, right? So I have my concerns, but I really like the fact that Thiers is experimenting, and I really hope that they succeed in that.
Yeah, I think so too. I think when we look at China and mopeds, they already have like charging hubs, right? I think. How come? I mean, we can easily do that as well with electric scooters, right? Put the charging hubs outside.
Yeah.
And I mean, especially with e-bikes, and now with the Okai batteries, they're big batteries. You can just swap them.
Yep.
So, I mean, I guess the reason why they want to work together with coffee shops is to also like generate revenue for these coffee shops and stuff. Or
could be. I mean, see, like I said, somebody who wants to save €1, I don't know if they would go to that coffee shop and spend €5, right? But I don't know. Maybe this entire e-scooter thing could become a mass market where it is affordable for everybody, and the swapping becomes a practice, right? User swapping becomes a practice. In Asia, it works because it is used by many. Right, it's not focused on a premium segment, but focused on everybody, right? Yeah. And I don't think we can compare that with what is happening here because we haven't reached this mass adoption yet, right?
True.
But when we reach mass adoption, maybe out of say 2,000 people using it, 10 or 50 people swapping, maybe.
And again, to reach the mass adoption, it has to do with behavioral change, right?
Yeah, it's behavior change, pricing. There's so many things, and we are not there yet, and I think it's a long way to go. Yeah,
exactly. Okay, so I want to discuss something amazing that just happened recently, an acquisition.
Okay.
Thiers bought Nextbike. I always wondered how come none of these other scooter companies bought like a bike share, traditional bike share before, because it makes so much sense.
Yeah.
To acquire like a traditional bike share because they have so much knowledge.
Yeah.
They've been around for many years, are in many territories, have the know-how, the people. and of course they will definitely support you by with winning tenders, because locally they are very strong.
Yeah. See, I mean, I think traditional bike share doesn't get the appreciation that it deserves, because they've been around for a very long time, and they were not focused on premium segment, but offering mobility to all, right? I mean, whether they were profitable, economically viable, that's secondary. But then with subsidies and everything, I think they did their job, right? And in terms of the acquisition, the acquisition that Tier made, I strongly feel that it's a very smart play that would bring them much closer to cities.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Because I think I said that a few minutes ago that this entire micromobility business is a B2G business, right? It's not a B2C, a B2B business, right? So the more you win the trust of governments, the more tenders you win. The more tenders you win, the more scooters you have, the much bigger your user base and business grows, right? And I think it's a very smart move. I don't know what the reasoning was behind the acquisition, but I strongly feel that it's going to be super positive for them.
Yeah, exactly. And Tier just became one of the biggest bike share companies with that acquisition, right?
Exactly.
I wonder if they will continue to use the current hardware of Nextbike, or if they will introduce the new.
We'll see.
We'll see, right? That's exciting.
E-bikes are super challenging. So, I mean, if you go out there, normally people reach out to me asking, hey, I mean, which e-bike do you recommend? I would say none. But so yeah, I mean, we'll see.
I mean, e-bikes, building a good e-bike takes a lot of iterations, Absolutely. A lot of years. And I think the industry is still not where it should be, I guess, to have a really good e-bike.
True. I mean, at Bond, we build our own e-bike, but where we were focusing on the customer experience. So we were trying to match the same experience that you would have on a Stromer bike, right? And it is not so easy. I mean, unless you know what you're doing, it's very difficult. You can run into problems, and every problem is like a lot of cash burnt as well, right? Yeah. And so it's not like software where something goes wrong and then you just sit overnight and code and change things. It's very difficult.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. And sorry to cut you off. I think a few micromobility players started off trying to make their own bike, but I guess they realized that it's very difficult to be a software company and also do hardware, but also be an operator. You guys were able to do it, right?
Yeah, I mean, it is difficult, but it's not impossible, right? But if you succeed in being a very good operator, a very good software company, but with your own hardware, like everything seamlessly integrated, I think that's a right play. But it's extremely difficult.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah. I think if you want to succeed, you need to have it in-house, right? Because otherwise,
it's like this. If you really don't know, then just go buy off the shelf and run it, right? Get to a maturity where you have like sufficient cash to experiment on hardware development and then do it, right? But on the other hand, if you have a solid team that knows how to build bikes, how to build software and operations, I think it's best to do internally. But then know that, any mistake that you make in hardware, it's going to be like a couple of millions burnt.
Yeah. Okay, I have one question. Name one company that is able to successfully do the hardware, software, and operation. And there are a lot of micromobility players.
See, I respect what Lime achieved so far.
True. Lime, they were with their scooter, the very first one.
So they were one of the first ones to have a very large engineering team building their own hardware. Bird, they started building their own as well. That I respect.
Yeah.
I mean, I know that there's a lot of comment on the Lime scooter and Bird scooter and all this stuff, but then I really respect them for the fact that they managed to take that risk. I mean, of course, they burnt a lot of a lot of millions, but then they got something out which is still on the streets.
They also received a lot of millions, of course.
Yeah, and Jump, for example, right? And then there are a bunch of companies that are doing pretty good.
Actually,
that did pretty good.
Yeah, actually, the Lime scooter. The lifetime is quite impressive, I think, because I think there are still some early Lime scooters in the Czech Republic now.
True, and I mean, if you see the latest models, they are pretty good. I mean, I'm very sure that they spend much more money than Tier or other companies that would just buy scooters. When you look at the net amount spent, but then I think it was a good iteration for them. And on the other hand, if you look at Okai or Segway, they have a very big R&D budget as well. I mean, if I'm not wrong, I think in 2020, Segway spent close to like 70 million, a very big number just on R&D, right? And I don't think we have companies that have the appetite to spend like 70 million in R&D, right? So that also puts these companies in a disadvantage. I mean, if you look at 2018, one of the biggest talks was like, okay, I mean, we have to build our own hardware, right? I mean, I'm not talking about e-bikes. E-bikes is a different play, but even for scooters, right? But then companies that spend so much energy,
you cannot compete.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you spend 1 year building something. In the meantime, Segway and Okai came up with like 6 different models. Right. So it doesn't make sense.
They have the know-how, they have the cash, and the people to actually
Exactly. So if you cannot match their speed, then there's no point. But luckily, Lime and Bird, they had they did work with these companies, but then they had their sufficient funding for them to take that risk.
Okay.
But it was also interesting to see that I think it was in Paris. I saw some Okai scooters that Lime put out, and recently there was a picture of a Bird scooter, which was Okai scooters rebranded. So yeah, I mean, it's very difficult to build your own hardware.
Yeah, it's a challenge, especially when it comes to bikes, because even the actual bike providers are still like iterating and improving, right? So
yeah, for e-bikes, the problem is that for consumer e-bikes, there's sufficient companies building those bikes, but then shared bikes are not exactly the same as those. Right, from electrical architecture and many other things, because you have an IoT that controls everything. So there's and also like the entire thing should be durable, easily maintainable, and all that, right? So it's very difficult, and there are not many companies that are building these shared bikes, right? Maybe also because there's not a lot of demand either, right? So though we see that. There are e-bike, companies want to get into e-bikes. If you look at the number of e-scooters that they would order this year versus e-bikes,
exactly,
scooters are still a better play than e-bikes.
Yeah, exactly. All right. So, where do you see the market going? The micromobility market. So, do you think more companies will start to be multimodal? Because a few already have, e-bikes, but also e-scooters. But I'm not sure if Voi already implemented e-bikes.
They had some trials with e-bikes. They were, in fact, one of the first ones to introduce e-bikes. I think it was in 2019, I believe. They had a big event with e-bikes and cargo bikes and all this stuff.
I remember, and they won the tender for Oslo.
Something like that. But and I think recently they partnered with a company to have e-bikes for a specific city. So everybody they're trying. So I think a couple of things might happen. One is like e-scooter companies that say that, hey, I want to be a multimodal and invest into buying very expensive bikes. Bikes are expensive than scooters, like three times more. And if you look at taxes and transport,
the import tax is crazy.
Yeah, and it could be 4 times more than what a scooter is, right? So they might realize that, that's a completely different ball game, and it's a completely different business, and they might start refocusing on scooters. That might happen, but companies with a lot of cash, they might become multimodal, right? But then again, we have to see how this entire free-floating bike sharing will pick up as well, right? If you look at Jump and many other companies, we haven't had a crazy success story yet, right?
Especially in Europe. Obviously, you have the traditional ones, Next Bike and so on. Yeah. But in terms of the new startups, I haven't seen any bike share.
Free-floating bike sharing as such, there's not. Bond we did operate in Zurich, which was pretty good, but then it wasn't the normal e-bike; it was speed e-bikes. So there was a completely different category of vehicle, right? Yeah. So it is yet to be seen. But for many companies, when they know that they're limited to say 1,000 scooters in a city, right? The only way they can expand is adding another mode, right? Which is an e-bike or an e-moped, right? Will they have all that forever? We don't know. We have to see.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? But I feel that, companies with a lot of cash, they might have like a lot of scooters, a certain percentage of e-bikes and e-mopeds, just to say that, hey, I mean, we are multimodal.
Yeah.
Right? But in terms of how the industry moves, it's very difficult to say. We are very, very early, right? And I strongly feel that it will still be like, a B2G business, right? Where, all these cities will govern what should happen and how many scooters should be there and how it should operate, right? But on the other hand, I strongly feel that some of these companies will also shift their focus from shared to owned.
Oh, that's interesting. Why do you feel, okay? What do you feel about this? How do you think?
This is something that I was saying for quite some time, is that if you look at the global market, right,
owned is the biggest.
Is like much bigger than shared, right? And even for heavy users in cities where they use scooters and they like it, immediately what they do is like, they go buy one for like $300 or $400.
Exactly.
Right. And the sufficient data, like for example, I think it was in a period between 2018 and 2019, I believe, in South Korea, out of 500,000 e-scooters imported, 90% of them were owned scooters.
Wow.
Right?
Yeah.
And if you look at data from France, I think in 2019 or 2020, I think about 600,000 scooters were sold, and most of them were owned as well. Right. So if you look at companies operating in, say, Paris or many other cities, right, governments decide whether this company should be there or not, right?
Correct.
From a shared perspective.
Correct. Yeah.
What if tomorrow the government decides, hey, I mean, it's not these 3 companies, it's going to be another set of 3 companies.
Yeah.
Right. For you to stay relevant in a market, you have to capture this own market as well, which is like much bigger.
Okay, but do you think they will go into they will enter the own markets through actually like selling these scooters or bikes, because they have big competition? For example, Segway is the biggest, and it's hard to compete. Or do you think they will enter this market by providing different business model, for example, leasing or long-term leasing, for example?
Yeah, I think today the entire market is dominated by companies like Segway.
Exactly,
right?
yeah.
And that's where they are comfortable. I mean, they don't make a lot of noise in the shared market, and we think that, hey, I mean, they lost, but they are winning.
They own the own market.
They are winning. And 2020, I believe, probably close to 500 million of their sales came from e-scooters, like owned e-scooters.
Owned e-scooters.
Right. And in 2019, I think Amazon placed an order for $17 million worth of e-scooters. Wow. Right. So that's a massive market. Right. So, and if you look at shared companies, an advantage that they have is that they accumulated so many users. So they have a very large user base that they can reach out to. Right. Yeah. There are multiple models. I know that, some companies, they try out leasing. Like, for example, Bird has a leasing program in the US, which is popular. Like, you pay $25 a month. You get a scooter. I don't know how successful right now it is, but then, that's a model that companies can free. You guys were doing that as well for corporates.
Actually, yeah. Our model was almost like an owned scooter for the company, actually.
Yeah.
Right?
So that's one model that companies might tap into. I don't think, this refurbished shared scooters which users can own, I don't think that is a good model, just because it is bulky and you cannot carry around. Right?
Yeah.
But there are companies like, for example, Bird and Helbus, right? They are silently building a portfolio of owned scooters. I think recently there was an announcement from Bird where you had like, the small scooters for kids. And then there was like a foldable scooter for adults, and then an e-bike. Yeah. Right. And Bird was also like building a network of dealerships.
Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, if you look at Belgium, I think there's a bunch of dealer network that they already,
Oh, really?
Yeah, they already have a dealer network. And I strongly feel that that's a good move to make.
That's actually a great way to expand through dealership.
Yeah, especially, if you have your own engineering teams, like what Bird has.
Exactly.
You can use that for shared scooter building, right? Yeah. And you can also use them for these kind of products, because, your core team has expertise in building these products, right? So, and I wouldn't be surprised in a couple of years if we know Bird as, this personal mobility, own mobility company rather than a shared company.
Yeah, exactly. Actually, I forgot about it because I know Bert announced this dealership thing a few years ago, but then it was a bit quiet around it. So I thought they stopped it, but apparently it's still.
I hope they don't drop it like many other very good initiatives that they started.
Like the credit card. I mean, they had like
the pay, and they had like connecting local businesses and all this stuff. I hope they don't drop it like that. I hope that they push forward.
It's a good thing.
And one more thing in this model that not many kind of experimented is merging this owned and shared services, right? So if you remember a couple of years ago, we had this Drive Now in Brussels.
Correct.
So it's like premium cars like 1 Series or something from BMW that you find in the streets that you can rent out, right? You can use, but I feel that BMW failed in connecting this owned and shared experience. So, for example, you as a BMW owner, right? If you own a BMW car, and say, for example, you pay, I don't know, yearly a fee, right? And you get access to these shared BMW cars across Europe, right?
That's extra added value.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, for example, I say that I have a BMW in Brussels that I own, and I'm in Munich tomorrow, and I can use a BMW there.
Makes sense, yeah.
So, I think they missed an opportunity, and probably all these micromobility companies, maybe they have a shot at experimenting at that. For example, Bird that has personal devices, say that you buy a Bird bike, right? And say that, and probably it gives access to all the Bird scooters in the city when you're in the city. Yeah. Right?
That would make sense, right?
Yeah, I think, these kind of business model innovations might make sense.
Yeah.
I'm super excited for what
to come. We don't know what to expect because the market, the industry evolves so fast. Absolutely. And they try so many different things. Actually, to get back to the multimodal topic, there is actually a company in Holland that is multimodal when I think about it. GlobalShoring. They have cars now, mopeds, e-bikes. I'm not sure about scooters though. They have scooters as well.
I don't know. I don't think scooters are legal yet.
But it's quite impressive to see that they are able to have these 3 different modes, and they started in 2019, I think. So
it is difficult to have multiple. Yeah, because e-scooters, for people who get into this business, they would understand the e-scooters are very different from business model perspective and operations perspective. It is different from e-bikes. E-bikes are different from cars, and so it's like building 3 different companies.
Exactly. Especially in terms of like the operation stuff, battery recharging. If you have a shared car, it's whole.
Exactly. See, for scooters and bikes, I was kind of bullish when there was I think it was Okai that came up with a model which actually used the same battery for scooters and
bikes,
right? And I think Jump also was experimenting on it. That makes sense, right? So you find 2 different modes, right? 2 different vehicles, completely different form factor, but then you have, from an ops perspective, you have some commonalities, right? So you have the same batteries that is swapped.
It's efficiency.
Yeah, exactly. So that would make sense.
Yeah, exactly. And even though the market is still relatively small, a lot of money has been invested to it. But also a lot of startups are now doing SPACs. Tell me a little bit, what is your opinion on these companies doing SPACs? Because it's a trend.
Yeah, I see. At the end of the day, for investors who invest into these companies, they have to have an exit.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
And if you look at Bird or even Helbis and all these companies, right? If you look at the start to exit, right, which is SPAC, it was very short. Right, and I think it was pretty good for some of the investors. Some would have lost money if in case they invested in a much higher valuation, but for many it gave a good exit window, right? Yeah. So there's nothing.
Do you think European startups will also go that way? Because I think Helbis is American as well, I think.
They are.
Or Italian.
I think they were Italian, but then they moved their HQ to US. European companies, will they do it? I think so. Yeah. Okay. I wouldn't be surprised if, for example, Tier IPOs very soon.
Oh wow.
Yeah. And there's nothing wrong in it. It also opens up a new way of raising funds as well. If you look at Tesla or Neo. Neo, for example, after they did the SPAC, after the listing, they managed to raise multiple rounds of funding just from public markets, right?
Yeah.
So it gives a new way of raising funds as well. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
It all depends on how this capital is like intelligently allocated, but it also gives these companies much more risk potential as well.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, yeah, it gives them a runway and you know, a look into the
and
future.
helps them iterate.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
All right. So, you know, we discussed the micromobility industry, you know, those early days, those wild days. We, you know, we also looked at some individual companies and their strategy. I mean, looking back now, what do you think, you know, could have been improved from the companies? What do you think, or where do you think we missed an opportunity to really improve things, or to do things better? For example, you know, we discussed some companies that tried out their own e-bike. Obviously, that did not work for everybody, but they learned, right? And they moved on. So,
see, in terms of the last 3 years, how we got here, I think it went well, right?
Yeah.
I mean, in terms of iterations and, you know, Segway and Okai helping out all of us, right? But in terms of what we could have done better, I think some of the companies could have stayed in their course and stayed truthful, not pushing, like, you know, fake or false narratives, right? I mean, it did help them grow, but then I don't think that is right. Right. I don't want to name those companies, but then, you know, companies saying that you know, e-scooters are green, or some companies saying that, hey, I mean, for every kilometer that you travel, you're actually removing CO2 from being emitted.
Yeah.
You know, I think from a narrative perspective, most companies could have done better.
Yeah.
Right. And that's why I have like huge respect for companies that stay grounded and not say that they're climate or planet saviors, right? But yeah, I think other than that, from a product perspective, if you look at the 2 or 3 years that we had and the scooters that we have right now,
it's crazy. It's amazing.
I mean, the scooters that we have in the streets right now compared to ES4, because I have a bunch of ES4s as well, we have gone, like, you know, we did grow really.
I remember riding an ES4 in Brussels over those cobblestones. Yeah. It was not comfortable.
Exactly. But if you look at the recent DOT scooters, they are very comfortable. Lime scooters, Voi, all these are like, I mean, I think Okai and Segway, they did an amazing job. Right.
Yeah.
So overall, I think we did really well from software perspective. We matured from, you know, going from white label software, from most of these companies having their own, and we see that those changes as well reflecting.
Yeah, correct.
And from IoT perspective, things are improving as well.
Yeah.
I think there could be much more done from an IoT perspective, because right now, I think most some companies, they look at it as a device that just connects the scooter to the cloud, lets you lock unlock. But I think you can do much more with the data that you gather. You can do a lot of proactive maintenance with the data that you gather. Like you would know when, like, for example, a motor would fail or battery would fail.
Of course,
right?
yeah.
So it's like, you know, having preventive maintenance in place, right? Yeah. And very few companies have this entire loop closed, right? So I mean, if you have scooters that have a lot of data, right, that they collect from subsystems that pump it out through the IoT, right? And if IoTs can have localized decision-making power, right, it can actually mark the scooters by itself, saying that, hey, I mean, I can operate right now.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So, you know, those kind of things can improve, and I don't see a lot of companies doing that.
Mm-hmm. Correct. But I think, I mean, like you said, we also need to give credit to the industry, because
absolutely,
you know, it's still very early, but we had almost 2 years of a global pandemic, and I was very surprised to see how they were able to start over again and reach higher levels than they had before. So that's quite
I don't know the recent data, but that's a good point that you brought up. I mean, if you look at the 3-4 years of you know, these e-scooter craze, 2 solid 1.5. I mean, more than a year solid was like, you know, lockdowns and everything, and then we still have these companies around and raising funds.
They are bigger than ever now. It's crazy.
Yeah. So I think we have to give them credit. right? Not many perished, and probably some smaller ones perished, but the bigger ones, though they had challenges, they're still around.
Yeah, it's quite impressive. All right, I want to kind of like close the micromobility topic here. Now I want to know a little bit more about your future, your next venture. You are not working in mobility. I mean, even though you're still on Twitter, sharing your opinion and stuff, which you will probably always do because you're so passionate. What is next for Prabin?
Okay, so it's been a couple of years in mobility, right? And it's a very important problem to solve. Providing alternate mobility options,
correct,
right? And at Bond, we were focusing on giving a vehicle that actually average distance is much higher, so that it replaces much more car trips, right?
Yeah.
In terms of thinking what to do next, something that I'm super passionate about is human longevity. So human longevity is like, for example, if you take 1950s or early say 1920 or something, our average life expectancy was very, very less. Right?
Correct.
Just to give you an idea, in 1950, I think the global average life expectancy was around 42 years. So people on an average at birth, right? I mean, they lived only 42 years, right? And now, after 70 years, we are at 72. Yeah. Right? So we are at almost about 30 years to our average life expectancy, right? Yeah. And there's something called healthy life expectancy, which is still lower. I think it's about 63 average, right? And I strongly believe that human beings, with all the advancements in technology and everything, we could easily live 100 years, right? And 100 years in a healthy way, right?
Of course. Yeah.
So, and for human beings to live for a very long time, there are multiple elements that contribute to it. So there's like food, there's fitness, there's healthcare. There's also early diagnosis, so knowing your body and understanding what's happening and detecting early signs of diseases, right? And mental health. There's so much, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
So I'm trying to tackle this and focus on helping human beings live longer. So I'm building a company around it and raising funds right now. Hopefully, I would announce it very soon. But raising funds for it right now.
And in a way, you will continue with your journey and impacting people's lives.
Absolutely,
actually, because that industry will allow people to actually live longer. So.
Yeah, live longer, live happier, live healthier.
Yeah.
And also like in the overall scheme of what I'm doing, there's also a component which also reduces overall CO2 emissions. So there's like multiple factors that contribute to it.
Yeah.
Right. So this is one that I'm working on, and second, my mom passed away recently, and she was battling cancer for a very long time.
Condolences.
And I'm planning to set up a foundation to help people in certain countries that don't have the means to pay for medical expenses, right? And also help them with early diagnosis of diseases, right? I mean, for example, my mom lived for I think 8-10 years after diagnosis, purely because we could give her very good health care and good food and good care, right? Yeah. But many people, they don't have it, right? Yeah. And they died just because they couldn't pay for one chemotherapy session, right? And so this is something that I want to support them with. So there are two things that I'm working on.
That's really great things, actually. That's great of you.
Absolutely.
I mean, I have to say, I've known you for many years and mobility. I want to thank you for coming to this podcast and discussing the the industry, which we always do on Twitter either way. So now we might as well record it. Yeah. What I also wanted to mention is when to kind of conclude is when I worked with you with Friel, we were able to do some really amazing things at a very low budget, but just because we were passionate. I remember when we were in Saudi Arabia and I was calling you because our scooters were at the airport in Hamburg, and these are the types of funny stories that we share with other mobility enthusiasts. So
but I mean, not many know. I mean, you guys were super early to the market as well. I mean, not many know. Would have heard about Friel right now, but then you guys were super early in the industry.
Yeah, I mean, I think we were able to do some great things, especially in terms of the business model.
Yeah.
Because I'm not sure if still it's done now, but the business model of Real was quite sustainable, I would say.
Absolutely.
Because we had, people pay for e-tool scooters.
Yeah.
And like a year contract or a 2-year contract even for, so that was quite an innovative thing.
Exactly. And also thank you so much for inviting me and thank you so much for the podcast because like I said initially, I mean, we need voices across the globe, and I'm really happy that you're providing a platform for voices from Europe.
Yeah, I mean, that is the goal, and I hope we will reach many listeners and
absolutely
attract.
So wishing you all the best.
All right, thank you very much. Maybe closing remarks before we go. Where do you see the industry going in the next 6 months? I remember I already asked you generally, but it's hard to say it over a long period, right? But in the next 6 months, where do you see it?
Yeah, I think 2022, I think, so 2021, I thought it's going to be the year of e-bikes, right? I think I did put out a tweet or a LinkedIn post early 2021 saying that this is going to be the year for e-bikes, but it did not happen because the second
lockdown and
the lockdowns and everything. And if things get better, I think 2022 is going to be the year of e-bike experimentation across the globe. I think every player would, whether they understand the business model or not, I think they would just buy a bunch of e-bikes from Okai or Segway, and they would put them in the streets.
Correct. And I think now they are also starting to focus more on data and behavioral change and so on. So I think that might come up as well in the near future. So.
Yeah, behavioral change, not many are focusing on it, but I really hope that someone would focus on it.
Yeah. Okay, I guess we will have to wait and see.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much. And
thank you.
Everybody, thank you for listening to this podcast.
Thank you.
All right.